Welcome to chapter 6. In this chapter, we would be covering white's alternatives right here on the sixth move. So, till now, we have been looking at options with sixth e3, but here we would check out white's ideas on move 6. These ideas, okay, they are not super critical, but yeah, as we have already discussed, once you have a couple of games in the database, your opponent might try to surprise you, and that's why it's important to just have a brief look at these ideas as well. So the critical line is for sure cd5, but white can also try a3, rook c1, queen b3, bishop f6, and yeah, cd5. Let's start with a3. As we have already seen multiple times in this position, provoking us to bishop c3 is rarely ever good. We play bishop into c3, spoil white's pawn structure, and after bc3, this time, because there is no e3 on the board, what we do is we play oops d into c4, and the second idea of knight f6 now comes into the play. We now have the idea of knight b6 and defending the pawn, or we could even try playing b5 and defend the c4 pawn. This is the reason why we play knight bd7 to attack the c4 pawn. If white plays e3, we play b5 and we keep a healthy pawn advantage. We want to play bishop b7 next, finish development, and if we are able to consolidate, we'll keep a very good advantage thanks to the extra pawn. If white plays e4, this is more ambitious. White gains more space, but at the same time, the pawn on e4 is vulnerable, which we try to exploit by playing h6. So, if white plays if white takes on f6, we have no problems. We take back with the knight, and already we don't have the problem of bishop pair. We have a better pawn structure. We have an extra pawn for the moment too. So we are threatening b5 and we are threatening knight e4. The only way to stop this is queen b1, but such moves can never be good. We just play b6, and after bishop c4, play bishop b7 and keep a very good position. White has a poor pawn structure. Our bishop is better placed, and we are ready to finish our development with short castle the next. After that, we'll try to attack white's weaknesses on d4 and c5 and c3 by c5. So bishop f6 isn't great, and if white plays bishop h4, we play g5, cut off the pin. White needs to go back, and then we win the pawn. Let's say white plays bishop c4, and rather than being greedy with knight c3 and giving white play, we just play b6, prepare bishop b7, play castle next, and after that, we have a very comfortable position because of the extra pawn. White does have some compensation, but it's not enough. So a3 isn't great. Rook c1, again, this isn't great either. The knight's on d7, this pawn is unprotected, which means we can play dc4. And then we play b5 or c5 based on white's response. Idea is simple. We want to preserve the c4 pawn. We want to challenge white's center, and yeah, then make normal moves. Queen b3 is possible, but usually in these lines, the queen on b3 is not well placed. Now, rather than playing bishop c3 and allowing white to not spoil the pawn structure with queen c3, what we do is we challenge white's center with c5 and defend the b4 bishop at the same time. We are also preparing queen a5 and playing the typical knight e4 idea, challenging the knight on c3. So cd5, ed5 transposes to an chapter. e3 is very slow. Why? We play queen a5. Now we are threatening knight e4. And if white plays bishop d3, pause for a second, look for black's best response, and exploit the tension in the center. How do we do that? By increasing more tension and playing b5. And white has no good response. cd5 runs into c4, we win material. CB5 runs into C4 as well. So white can't play E3 as well. The only move that remains is A3. And here we play a slightly unorthodox but a very natural strategic move, bishop a5. We keep the bishop pair on the board for now. We don't want to take on c3 because white can take back with the queen and white is not spoiling the pawn structure. With bishop a5, we are waiting. We would take on c3 at the right moment, or else we would liquidate in the center, challenge white's position because white hasn't completed the kingside development as of now. CD5, the most critical. If white plays E3, castle, CD, ED, and okay, CD, ED, what we want to do is we want to play C4. Then we want to play knight E4 somehow with H6, G5, gain space. And now C4 becomes even more stronger because we win at tempo. So white doesn't have bishop D3, where the bishop was better placed. White has a queen on B3, which means white has to play bishop E2. And white is spending an extra tempo because we'll get C4 in as well. All in all, perfect position for us. White wants to develop the bishop E2. We wins a tempo, gain more space, play C4, queen C2, H6. We force the bishop back, a very useful inclusion for us. Bishop H4, and now we get away from the pin and play G5. Bishop G3, knight E4. And then what we want to do is get all of our pieces out. We remain better due to more active pieces, more space, and a lead in development. So what white can try to do is play CD5. If we play ED5 here, then white's point is revealed. White can play D into C5, and we can't really take back because of queen B5 check. This forces knight D7, after which white has bishop F6, and we are forced to take back with the pawn because queen B6, queen F6 runs into queen A5. We don't want to do that, and we have a lead in development, so we get away from all the threats and play short castle. If white plays E3, E into D5 transposes to what we have already checked on the last move. We want to play C4, H6, G5, knight E4 and put pressure on the C3 knight. If white plays D6, which is very hasty and too ambitious because the king is in the center, you don't want to open up the files. What do? C into D4. If white plays ED7, DC, BC, BD7, and we are already crushing. The C3 pawn is too weak. There are too many threats. Rook C8 is coming. Bishop E6 is coming. White cannot defend all the threats against the C3 pawn. If white plays knight into D4, what do? We get all of our pieces in. We attack with each and every move. Knight C5. We attack the B3 queen and the knight on D4. So white is forced to play queen C4. Look at EF7. It looks tempting because you win another pawn, but it just helps us to play rook F7 and get a new piece into the game. When you are defending, you don't want to face the heat of all the pieces, and EF7 just opens up a file for another piece. So queen C4, and now we take back with the knight. We are still threatening knight G5 and knight D4. So white has to play knight E6. We get a new piece in and attack the queen at the same time. Already the position's very difficult for white. And after queen D3, rook C8, with the idea of putting more pressure on the C3 knight, black is just cruising here. Computer just says it's equal plus. But in my opinion, defending this as white is just very, very hard practically. Equal plus doesn't represent the real fact of the position, which is white is really struggling here due to the lack of development and the sheer amount of threats black is creating. We want to attack the C3 knight, get all of our pieces in, maybe even attack this pawn, and you just keep making threats, making your opponent's life miserable. So this is queen B3 is too hasty. Bishop F6, okay, it's a small idea. Just be careful that if you play knight f6, white wants to play queen a4 check, and oops, we lost a bishop. But what do? We play bishop c3 first, spoil white's pawn structure, and only after bc3 we take back. And our ideas are the typical QGD ideas. We want to castle, then we want to play dc4, b6, bishop b7, get the bishop out on the open file, and then start attacking the weaknesses with c5, rook c8, occupy the outpost on d5, and just press on white's queenside weaknesses. So, the only critical move that remains is cd5. We take back with the e pawn, and now there are multiple ideas. One is rook c1. White doesn't want to spoil the pawn structure after bishop c3, rook c3. Other is queen b3, but we have already seen that this is premature, and we play c5, transposing to the previous lines. There is knight d2, which is very smart, and even I have tried this as white in one of the games. There is queen a4, not challenging at all, but yeah, it's still good to know. And then there's queen c2, which is probably the most logical sideline out there. Let's start with rook c1. So what white wants to do? White wants to play a3 and then force us to take on c3, because if we go back, we just have a Carlsbad structure. What do? We play c6. We defend the d5 pawn against all the potential knight d5 threats, and at the same time, we are opening up the diagonal for our queen. White's critical move is for sure a3. e3 is not a problem for us. We play the very logical and the natural queen a5, making threats and preparing knight e4. White needs to play bishop d3. If you play something like queen b3, it's slow. Knight e4. We are attacking the bishop on g5, attacking the knight on c3. If white goes bishop f4, we again exploit the idea of c5, c4 by playing c5. Our idea is to play c4, and because the king is in the center, we also have the threat of playing queen into a2. So white can't play this. If white plays bishop d3, we play the logical knight e4 again. Again, we are trying to make threats, just force concessions from our opponent. You can't take on e4 because after d4, there is a double attack. So white needs to finish development with short castle. And as we have already seen multiple points, if white hasn't made a retreating move either with the bishop or with the bishop or with the knight, we don't take the pawn on c3. We win the bishop pair. Knight g5. And this time we play knight f6 because h6 runs into queen h5. And secondly, there is no threat of e4 as of now, because if you play e4, we can take, knight e4 or bishop e4 and just finish development. And we are not really bothered by white's e4 break. In fact, we are happy because now there is a weakness to attack to. We have the pair of bishops, so that means if the position is open and our king is safe, we are very comfortable. If white plays queen c2, provoking h6, what do? We play g6, not h6. Why? Because after h6, white wants to play knight f3 and then lodge the knight in the center with knight e5. How do we want to challenge this? At some point, we want to get our knight away and play f6. But because we have played h6, this square would be very weak. So with g6, what we are doing is we are not forcing the knight back to f3, and we are keeping the option of playing f6 later on in the future. It's a very subtle strategic point, but I think it makes a lot of sense. White should probably play a3. This is the most played move as well. And do we retreat or do we capture? By now, you know our approach. We want to capture. Rook into c3. bc3 doesn't make sense because you're spoiling your pawn structure for nothing. Queen a5 or h6. We just want to attack the weaknesses on the queen side. So rook c3, and this is a critical point because if given a chance, white just want to finish their development and then claim a small advantage because of the pair of bishops. What do we do against this? h6. Again, we know our idea. We want to get knight e4, then get queen a5, and after which we would have a great initiative. The only way for white to stop us from achieving that is to play rook e3 check. It looks very tempting to play this because you are forcing us to play king f8 and we can't castle anymore. But what's in it for black? Firstly, developing this f1 bishop becomes very hard. Secondly, I can always play g6 or g5, get the king out to g7, and then it's very safe. We have basically castled artificially, so we have spent a couple of tempos on that, but white needs to spend time to develop the bishop on f1 too. And note that the king is still on e1, which means white's king is not really safe as well. So king f8, bishop f4, bishop h4 is even worse. We play g5, bishop g3, knight e4, get the knight right into the center, and then play queen b6, queen a5, and start attacking white's weaknesses on the queen side and the weak king. So bishop f4. What do? Again, we fight for initiative. g5, bishop g3, bishop d6 was the point for white, but after king g7, knight e4 comes with a tempo and the bishop on d6 has to retreat because it's attacked, yeah? So essentially what you are doing is you are giving an extra tempo for black, which we are very, very happy to accept. Bishop g3, knight e4, same plans, queen b6, queen a5, knight f6, king g7, and we have a very pleasant position. So let's go back. Rook c1 isn't great. Queen b3 we have already checked, c5, and knight d2. So although this is a passive move, it's actually very tricky. The idea is white now wants to play knight d5. If you play bishop e7, that means the bishop has to move to a passive square as well. And okay, I made a retreating move, you made a retreating move, we are even. That's white's idea. I don't want to make a retreating move with my bishop because it's so much actively placed. So I propose playing c6. Okay, we are entering a different pawn structure here. So it's very important for you to absorb the ideas. e3. And rather than playing short castle bishop d3, which is a typical QGD position, this is known as the Carlsbad pawn structure, where white has 5 versus 4 majority on the king side and black has 4 versus 3 on the queen side. Sorry, white has 4 versus 3 on the king side and black has 4 versus 3 on the queen side. But white would try to attack us with the A and B pawns and play b5, pressurizing on the c6 pawn, and this is called as a minority attack. Rather than allowing that, I propose a small twist, and what I want to play here is play knight f8. The idea is I want to play knight g6, h6, and just trap the bishop, win the bishop pair. We are trying to exploit that the knight is on d2, which means white doesn't have the option of playing knight e5 anymore. White's best move is to get the bishop out, bishop d3, and we stay consistent with our plan, play knight g6, and the idea is to play h6, trapping the bishop. White castles, and now it's important to castle first and not to play h6 because of tactical reasons. Our king is in the center, this bishop is unprotected, and white can play bishop f6, queen f6. Take some time. Can you spot white's idea here? This is hanging, this is in the center, which white exploits with knight into d5, cd5, queen a4, and white wins the bishop on b4, essentially winning a pawn. So we castle first, get out of all knight d5 ideas, and are now preparing h6. The most critical move for white is f4 with the idea of f5, forcing us to play knight e7, after which white wants to play bishop into f6 and spoil our kingside pawn structure. If white plays something like queen c2, we are very happy and we achieve our plans with h6, bishop f6, queen f6. We have the pair of bishops now. White doesn't have a defender on the king side. What we want to do now is put pressure on the king side. We would try to play knight h4, queen g5. If possible, just get the bishop h3 tactical motif in. This bishop has fulfilled its purpose on b4, might just join the attack with bishop d6. These two squares are very weak and our play is going to revolve around them. Black is already slightly better from a strategic viewpoint. f4. So white's trying to play f5. What do? We follow our plan. We play h6. And now white's best bet is to take on f6. f5 isn't great because now we can exploit the weak pawn on e3. Firstly, by winning the bishop pair, h into g5, f into g6, and now focusing on attacking opponent's weaknesses by playing queen e7. We have got our new piece into the game. We are also preparing bishop g4 to finish our development. Then we want to put pressure on the e3 pawn by playing rook a e8 or just getting the bishop in, trying to attack these weaknesses on the king side again. Black has a slightly better position. So h6, bishop f6, queen f6. Again, if given an opportunity, we would like to consolidate with rook e8 or knight h4, knight f5, which means white is forced to play f5. And now it's very, very important to be tactically sharp and play queen g5. Why? A move like knight e7 is very slow. It traps our queen. How can white exploit this? If you spotted knight de4 or knight ce4, bravo. You're quite sharp tactically. And the point is, after de4, knight e4, queen h4, g3, queen h3, and the brilliant knight f2, our queen is trapped. Sounds very strange, but if you are looking about tactical motives all the time, you should spot this really quickly. So we can't do that. So we need to be careful and play queen g5. We get the queen out and we are putting pressure on opponent's weaknesses, the e3 pawn, and we are exploiting the unprotected bishop on d3. White needs to play queen e2, defending the e3 pawn, getting a new piece out. If you take on e3, g6, I can play queen e3 check, king h1, queen d3. Black has the bishop player. Black has an extra pawn. Black has weaknesses to attack to. Black is better. Queen e2. And now, knight h4. What we are doing? We are putting pressure on f5. We are putting pressure on g2. So white needs to exchange off our active knight with knight f3. White is eliminating a poor piece for an active one, a typical strategic decision. And there's a very important strategic point which I would like to address, that instead of capturing a piece on your own, in most of the situations, you want your opponent to capture, and that's why we play queen h5. Why is that so useful? Because let's say we play knight f3, right? Now, whenever you take a piece, your opponent would recapture, and in most situations, improve the position of a piece. So with knight f3, what happens is that white gets the rook in, and this rook is much better placed on f3 than it was on f1. White wants to play rook g3 next and put pressure on this pawn on g7. So rather than allowing that, what we do is we play queen h5, ask white to take on h4 since we are threatening knight into f5. White obliges, takes the knight, we take back, and if white plays rook f4, which is the main move, white gets a rook out in the game and attacks our queen. If you play something like f6, no problem. Rather than reacting to the threat immediately, I firstly make my threats, get my final piece out, and play bishop g4. Again, try to make threats, try to be counter-attacking, look for initiative all the time. Queen d2. Again, rather than playing g6, which is possible, I make threats, bishop d6, g3, forcing white to play, force us to play queen g5, after which we keep an eye on the weakness on e3. We want to play rook e8 next. We want to play bishop h3. There are additional weaknesses in white's position, and black is dominating here. So if white plays rook f4 here, we now quietly avoid all the the f6 ideas by playing queen f6. Our idea is simple. We want to play rook e8, bd7, bd6, force the rook back. And once we have done that, we have a weakness to attack to. We have the pair of bishops. White's kingside attack is not going anywhere, and black seems to be slightly better. Okay, so let's go back on the seventh move. This is an important sideline, but as long as you remember the motif of knight f8 followed by knight g6, h6, you should be fine. So queen a4, it's not the most challenging, but Magnus played this, and if the goat plays this, you follow them. c5, we defend the bishop, and we are ready to put pressure on this knight, either by h6, g5, knight e4, or maybe queen a5 at some point. So the only logical move to accompany the idea of queen a4 and putting pressure on the b4 bishop is to play d into c5. The idea, if you take on c5, white wins the pawn with knight into d5. Since we can't really take back due to the pin of the bishop, what we need to do is to play bishop into c3, b into c3. Now that we have spoiled white's pawn structure on the queen side, we would now look to attack those weaknesses. But before that, we play short castle, get our king to safety. Again, I would say this again and again, that get your king to safety and then start making threats. That's the way chess should be played. The king on e1 is bad, and we are going to exploit that. So the only way for white, not the only, but the strongest way, is to play queen b4. If you play queen d4, try to defend the c5 pawn. We can play h6. As usual, a very good inclusion for us. We get the bishop back. And now get a new piece into the game, create more threats, rook e8. Idea to play rook e4 and then play knight c5. Once we have won the pawn back, we are just absolutely better due to the lead in development. The rook would be on e4, the knight would be on c5. We have more space. White's pawn structure is worse than our pawn structure, and we are making threats. And if white plays queen b4, again, as usual, include h6, bishop h4, and now again rook e8. Idea is simple, rook e4, knight c5, winning the pawn. e3, and this time we can play rook e4, that's all right as well, but I like something even more, which is to get the knight into the game with g5, bishop g3, knight e4. And now I've centralized one of my knights. The minor pieces are the strongest in the center. I'm looking to centralize the other one with knight dc5 and open up the diagonal for the bishop. The position's balanced, but yeah, I think black is the ones pushing slightly because of the better pieces. But yeah, this is not so simple as other positions, and white does have some play. Yet, okay, you are black. And in the opening, even if you manage to get some play and you're not objectively better, that's completely all right as well. Okay, so this was it about the sideline with queen a4. Let's go back. The main move, queen c2. White defends the c3 knight with the queen and wants to play a3 next. What do we do? Typical c5. So if you play e3, we transpose to the already checked lines with queen a5. a3, as usual, isn't great. We take queen c3. This time though, white has not spoiled their pawn structure. What do we do? White wants to play dc5 next and claim that we have an isolated pawn. So we react to that by playing c4, gaining space and stopping the idea of bishop d3, where white's bishop is the best placed. White has two ideas here. One is to play knight d2, controlling knight e4, and the other is to play queen e3 check, giving a check to our king. Note that e3 isn't great because we just play b5 and keep a great spatial edge, and then all we want to do is finish our development with short castle, then play a5, queen b6, and start rolling pawns on the queen side with b4. So white's best bet is to play knight d2. If white plays queen e3, we are happy to trade the queens, queen e7, king e7, and then we just want to roll the pawns on both the flanks actually, with b5, a5, b4, or h6, g5, knight e4, f5, and just crush white with space. So if white tries knight d2, we play h6, as usual, force the bishop back. Now white has two options. One is bishop h4 and the other is bishop f4. If white plays bishop f4, I castle, e3, and this is a very smart move. I want to play b5 and try to play a5 and b4 on the next move. But if I play b5, white has a4, trying to include this rook into the game. If ba4, rook a4, this rook is wonderfully placed. White has a pair of bishops, and I think white has a slight edge here. So we don't want to do that, and we very cleverly start with a5. The idea, okay, if you play bishop e2, I start rolling my pawns with b5, then want to play queen b6, play b4, and put some pressure on the queen side. If white plays a4, and white seems to be very smart, stopping our plan of b5, we now exploit the weak pawn on a4 by playing knight b6. And the idea, I just want to get my worst placed piece into the game with bishop f5, then play queen d7 and put pressure on the pawn on a4. This is completely fine for us. What else? If bishop h4, castle, we finish our kingside development. e3, we want to activate our knight. g5 is not so great here because bishop g3 and white has ideas of h4. This is strong because white has got knight d2 in, stopping knight e4, and white hasn't even spoiled the pawn structure on the queen side. But we can exploit this by playing queen e8. The idea is, okay, now I want to play knight e4, centralize the queen, put pressure on the pawn on g2. At the same time, I want to play b5, a5, and gain space on the queen side. Black has a very good position. Your moves are very simple to play, and all you need to do is gain space on the queen side and develop your pieces. So this doesn't look very strong as well. One of the underplayed sidelines is g3. White wants to play bishop g2 and then take on c5 at some point, claiming that we have an isolated pawn, but it's a bit slow. What we do? h6. You know the logic by now. We force the bishop to an inferior square. White can't play bishop h4 because of g5 and the bishop is trapped. If you play bishop f6, you give up the bishop pair. We happily take back with the knight, open up the diagonal for our bishop, bishop g2, and now we want to play c4, but that runs into queen a4 check. So we play bishop into c3, queen c3, and now the very typical c4. We gain space, shut down the center so that this is not really an isolated pawn. Want to castle next, play knight e4, and then start rolling pawns, or maybe put pressure on the e file, get the bishop out, and just play a normal game. Our response depends a lot on what white does in this position. This is weak too, so we might even play queen b6 at some point. So the most ambitious move here is bishop f4. White doesn't give up the bishop pair and doesn't blunders the piece as well. What do? Castle, finish our development, bishop g2. And now if white can play castle, okay, all right, white has a small edge, but we don't allow that. What do? Bishop into c3, with the idea that queen c3 runs into c4. As usual, we shut down the center, gain space, and now we want to play knight e4 or maybe knight b6, bishop f5, get our last piece out, and then put pressure on the e2 pawn. And then at some point, we would start attacking the pawn on b2 as well. Black has a very comfortable game. Let's go back. c5. So dc5 is a very principled but not a strong move. White claims that we have an isolated pawn, but white lacks in development. What do? Typical h6, push the bishop back. If white plays bishop h4, we play this very standard queen a5 with the idea of knight e4, and our position's completely fine. We might play knight c5 at some point as well. So the strongest move for white is to play bishop d2, get rid of this pin, But now the bishop is not so well placed on d2. We castle, finishing our development. e3. White wants to play bishop d3, and although we have an isolated pawn, white's problem is that the bishop on d2 is stuck. It's inside the pawn change, not outside on g5, which means it's a bad bishop now, and thus we can very comfortably take on c5, then play b6, bb7, rook c8, get all of our pieces in, and the position is very standard. If the bishop was on g5, yeah, white would have a small edge. But because the bishop is on d2, the position is completely balanced. Black has a weak pawn, but better pieces. And the fight would now revolve around if we are able to exploit our lead in development or whether white can develop comfortably. We obviously wouldn't allow that. We would play b6, bb7, rook c8, then probably play knight e4 at some point or queen e7, knight e5, and just keep on improving the position of our pieces. Alright guys, this was chapter 6 where we covered white's alternatives on the 6th move after bishop g5. In the next chapter, we would move on to one of the third critical main lines, which even Sam Shankland recommends in his course. And I'm actually really excited about that line because it's very sharp and is what we are looking exactly to play as black. Alright, see you in the next chapter.